Today I will tell you about the mass evacuation of US citizens and Vietnamese refugees in April of 1975. This operation was called Operation Frequent Wind, and the photos of dozens of people cramming into helicopters are considered by many to be a symbol of the US defeat in the Vietnam War. But let's start from the beginning. Before watching, please subscribe to the channel. According to statistics, 99% of people watch the video without subscribing. In 1975, the United States had not actively participated in the Vietnam War for 2 years. The process of withdrawing troops began in 1969 and was completed in 1973. Americans assumed that the South Vietnamese regime would eventually fall, but they did not expect it to happen so quickly. According to US intelligence estimates, South Vietnam was supposed to hold out until 1976, but after a successful offensive by the North Vietnamese, panic set in. The Communists were on the doorstep of Saigon as early as April. There were still over 1,000 American citizens and tens of thousands of South Vietnamese who feared reprisals from the Communists. The flow of refugees was enormous. They ran in all possible directions. The Americans had evacuation plans prepared in advance, and a powerful operational group of more than a dozen ships, including aircraft carriers, was being assembled off the coast of Vung Tau to provide support for the evacuation. Can you imagine the chaos in Saigon? Especially after the airport and nearby base were shot at and bombed several times. Mass evacuation by planes became impossible. The only option for the operational rescue of refugees was helicopters. The Americans distributed brochures with recommendations for the actions of civilians in emergency situations, as well as indicating a signal that would mean the start of the evacuation. The operation began on the morning of April 29th. In total, 1,373 Americans and 5,595 Vietnamese were evacuated by helicopters. The air was literally filled with both American and South Vietnamese helicopters. One of the interesting episodes happened with the South Vietnamese Cessna. Its pilot, Major Boang, dropped a note on the deck of an aircraft carrier asking to move the helicopters so he could land. The note also stated that he was with his wife and 5 children and had only an hour of fuel left. The Americans immediately reacted and began dropping helicopters worth $10 million per board. As soon as the runway was cleared, Major Boang landed. The flow of helicopters with refugees was so great that they no longer fit on the decks. There was no time or opportunity to refuel the arriving South Vietnamese helicopters, so they were simply thrown into the sea. In total, 45 helicopters, mostly South Vietnamese, were thrown into the sea during the operation. There was no special regret for the lost helicopters, as otherwise they would have fallen into North Vietnam. Other helicopters landed passengers, and then pilots jumped out of the machines into the sea. The frequent wind operation is evaluated differently. Some consider it an example of the emergency evacuation of thousands of people. Indeed, more than 50,000 people were saved in total. Others consider the events of April 29th a shameful retreat of the United States and a symbol of America's defeat in Vietnam.